The night Sarah Pell carried a tray of bone scraps into the kitchen garden for the 9th time, the moon was a thin silver coin balanced on the eastern wall, and she did not yet know that the creature waiting under the rosemary hedge was older than the throne she scrubbed floors for. She did not know that 9 streets of torchlit nobles were already gathering in the great hall above her head. She did not know that 12 perfumed alpha daughters were being laced into ceremonial silks at that exact hour, or that the Alpha King had returned from 5 years of border war with a treaty ring already weighing down the inner pocket of his coat. What she knew was this: the silver wolf in the hedge was still breathing. The wound along its flank had stopped weeping at last, and the bowl of broth she had stolen from the stockpot was still warm under the cloth. That was the whole shape of her world tonight. A bowl, a bandage, a creature that had not died yet because she had not let it. The narrator who watches her from a place she cannot see would say it differently. The narrator would say that the night Sarah Pell carried bone scraps to a dying animal for the 9th time, she was already being chosen, and the entire kingdom was about to learn that mercy keeps better records than blood. She knelt by the hedge in the dark. The frost had not come yet, but the air had that brittle edge to it, the kind that cut through the thin wool of her servant's dress and made her shoulders draw in. She had torn the left sleeve 9 days ago to bind the wolf's flank, and she had not asked the linen mistress for a replacement because questions invited attention, and attention, in her experience, invited cruelty. So she went about the estate one-armed in cloth, tugging her shawl tighter when she passed the upper corridors, and nobody noticed, because nobody had truly looked at Sarah Pell in 2 years. 2 years ago, she had stood in the lesser chapel in a borrowed white dress and watched her fated mate, a middle-ranking warrior named Kale, take her hand in front of his family and say, plainly and without heat, that he refused the bond. He said the goddess had made an error. He said an Omega Scullion's daughter from the border villages was beneath the dignity of his line. He said it the way a man returns spoiled fruit to a market stall. She had walked out of that chapel with her hand still half raised where his had dropped it, and the next morning she had been moved from the upper chambers to the kitchens, because a publicly rejected Omega was a stain on a noble household, and the only mercy available to her was being put somewhere she would not be seen. She had not cried that morning. She had not cried any morning since. She did not have the energy for it, and grief, she had learned, was a luxury that interfered with the carrying of trays. The wolf lifted its head when she set the bowl down. Its eyes in the moonlight were the color of struck flint, pale and steady. And when she reached out with the cloth dipped in willow water, it did not flinch the way it had on the first night. On the first night, it had bared teeth long enough to open her wrist if it wanted to, and she had simply waited, kneeling, hands open, until it understood that she was not a thing that hurt. Now, on the 9th night, it leaned into her palm. The fur along its jaw was matted with old blood, and she worked at it patiently, the way she worked at everything, with the small, steady persistence of a woman who had learned that no one was coming to do it for her. "You're better tonight," she murmured to it. "Tomorrow I'll bring you the marrow bone from the venison. Cook never counts the marrow." The wolf made a low sound in its chest, not quite a growl, more like a hum settling into the dark, and Sarah felt that hum travel up through her wrist and into her ribs and lodge there, warm, in a place she had not felt warmth in for 2 winters. She didn't think anything of it. She thought it was relief. She thought the animal was thanking her in the only language it had. She finished cleaning the wound, refolded the bandage from her torn sleeve, fed it the broth a careful spoonful at a time, and then she sat with it for a long while, with one hand resting lightly on its shoulder, watching its ribs rise and fall under her palm. And somewhere 4 floors above her, in a hall lit by 100 candles and lined with 12 alpha daughters in white, A great bronze horn was being lifted to the lips of a herald, and the Alpha King was about to find out that the goddess had a sense of humor he was not going to like. The horn sounded from the high tower at the 8th bell, and the great hall of Wolf Keep filled the way a held breath fills a chest. 12 candidates stood along the dais in a curve, each one a daughter of a noble pack, each one in the white silk of selection, with her hair bound in the old style. At the center stood Princess Raylan of Vossreach, alpha-born, treaty-bound, and beautiful the way a sword is beautiful, which is to say purposeful and cold. She did not fidget. She had been raised since 7 years old to stand exactly where she was standing now. 5 years ago, when the border war had still been counted in months instead of years, her father and Darian Wolf had sat across a council table and signed the treaty that would end the killing in exchange for a wedding, and Raylan had been the price written into the parchment. She knew it. She had agreed to it. She did not consider herself sold. She considered herself useful, which was the highest compliment her father had ever paid her, and she intended to earn it tonight. To her left, Lady Anya of the Crescent Hold smoothed her skirt for the 3rd time. To her right, Lady Ashley of Highmere kept her chin lifted at the angle she had practiced in the mirror. Beyond them, the others, daughters of the river packs, of the stone packs, of the high pine reach, stood in the careful symmetrical arrangement that the master of ceremonies had spent a week choreographing. The court ringed the hall in tears. Banners hung from the rafters. The throne sat empty on the upper step, because the king had not yet entered. He entered now. He came in the way a closing door comes in, which is to say, without ceremony and without delay. Darian Wolf had been at war for 5 years, and he wore those years on him like a second coat. He was tall in the way that made tall men around him recalculate, broad through the shoulder where the sword belt crossed his chest, and his face had the still, unornamented quality of a stone that had been worked smooth by water. There was a scar along his jaw from the 2nd siege at Hollow Vale, and a thinner one across his left brow from a thing he had never spoken about. His eyes were the dark slate gray that ran in the wolf line, and at the moment those eyes were tired in a way that the court did not see and that he did not permit himself to feel. He wore the ceremonial black and the heavy circlet, and the treaty ring rode the inner pocket of his coat against his ribs like a small, cold weight. He took the dais in 3 strides, turned, and faced the hall. He did not speak. The high priestess spoke for him. She invoked the old names. She invoked the moon and the iron and the long line of wolf blood. She invoked the diamond wolf, the ancestral guardian that came once in a generation, the silver-coated arbiter who had chosen every Luna of consequence in the kingdom's recorded history. And she said the words that would call it from wherever it slept. There was a long, listening silence. Darian's jaw flexed. He did not believe in the diamond wolf the way the priestesses did. He believed in treaties and in standing armies and in the careful management of grief. He believed Raylan would step forward, the wolf would manifest in some symbolic shape, and the priestess would declare the match consecrated, and his kingdom would have its peace, and his bed would have a stranger in it, and that would be the shape of the rest of his life. He had made his peace with that shape. He had stopped resenting it somewhere around the 3rd winter at the front, when he had watched a sergeant from the river packs die slowly because no relief column could come, and he had understood, with a cold, final clarity, that one wedding was cheaper than one more siege. The air in the hall changed. It thinned, the way it thins before a storm comes through a mountain pass, and then thickened again. And then there was a sound like a great hinge turning somewhere far away and very close at the same time, and the diamond wolf manifested at the foot of the dais. It was enormous. Its coat was the pale silver of a winter river, and its eyes were the color of struck flint. And there was, along one flank, a rough strip of cloth that did not match its coat at all. Torn linen, stained dark, carefully tied. The court did not see the cloth at first. The court saw only the wolf. The priestess raised her hands and called Raelin forward. The diamond wolf turned its head slowly and looked at Raelin of Vossreach and roared. The sound went through the hall like a struck bell. Raelin did not flinch. She had been trained not to. But the color left her face all at once. The priestess hesitated, recovered, called Lady Anya. The wolf roared at Lady Anya. It roared at Lady Ashley. It roared at the daughter of the Crescent Hold and the daughter of the High Pine Reach and the daughter of the Stone Pax and at every white-silked candidate down the dais, one after another. The same long bronze bell roar, and by the 8th roar the hall had stopped breathing entirely, and Darien Wolf, on his throne, was no longer tired. He was furious. He was frightened, though he would not have used that word. He was watching the most carefully constructed piece of his reign come apart on a marble floor in front of 200 witnesses, and he did not yet know that downstairs, 4 floors below, in a kitchen garden that smelled of rosemary and old blood, a maid in a torn-sleeved dress was kissing the top of a silver wolf's head goodbye and telling it she would see it tomorrow. The wolf turned away from the dais. The priestess's hand was still raised. No one had given the wolf permission to turn away. No one in the hall's recorded memory had ever given the diamond wolf permission to do anything, because the diamond wolf was the thing that gave permissions. But the moment cracked open anyway, and the great silver creature simply walked off the marble step, padded down the central aisle between the rows of nobles, and went out through the side arch into the servants' corridor, as if it had remembered an appointment. The court did not know what to do. The priestess made a noise that was meant to be a word and came out a breath. Princess Raelin turned her head, slowly, by inches, and watched the wolf go, and her face did something that her training had not prepared her face to do. Darien was already moving. He came off the throne and down the dais in long strides, and the captain of his guard, Callan, fell in behind him without being told. The court spilled after them like wine off a tilted table, decorum forgotten, because the diamond wolf had just walked out of its own ceremony, and nobody alive had a precedent for what came next. The servants' corridor was narrow and low-ceilinged, and smelled of soap and tallow, and it was not built to hold a king and a guard captain and a priestess and a trailing knot of nobles, and it certainly was not built to hold the diamond wolf, whose shoulder brushed the wall on either side as it walked. It walked unhurried. It walked the way something walks when it knows exactly where it is going. Sarah was coming up the back stair with an empty refuse tray balanced on her hip and a piece of bread in her teeth because both her hands were full, and she was thinking about whether the cook would notice if she took a second helping of broth tomorrow. And she rounded the corner at the top of the stair and walked directly into the chest of an enormous silver wolf. The tray hit the flagstones. The bread fell. She made a small sound that was not quite a word. And her first thought, absurd, immediate, was, "Oh no, you're not supposed to be inside." Her second thought, slower, was, "You're standing. You're walking. You shouldn't be walking yet." Her third thought did not have time to form, because the diamond wolf, the ancestral guardian of the wolf line, the arbiter of lunas, the creature that had just roared at 12 of the most carefully bred alpha daughters in the kingdom, lowered its enormous silver head and pressed its forehead gently against her collarbone, and then folded its forelegs and knelt at her feet. The corridor behind it filled with people. She did not see them at first. She saw only the wolf, and the strip of her torn sleeve still tied around its flank, and the way its great pale eyes closed when she put her hand on the top of its head, out of pure, stunned habit. Then she heard the breathing. A lot of breathing. She looked up. The corridor was full. The Alpha King was 3 paces away. He was looking at her. He was looking at her in a way she had not been looked at in 2 years. Which is to say, he was looking at her at all, directly, with the full weight of a face behind it. Behind him stood the captain of his guard, the high priestess, and a press of nobles in ceremonial silk whose faces she did not know how to read, because she had spent 2 years training herself not to read the faces of the people upstairs. She became aware, slowly, of the tray on the floor, of the bread, of her torn sleeve, of the streak of soot on her cheekbone she had not had time to wash off, of the fact that the diamond wolf was kneeling in front of her, and that this, by every law and custom she had ever overheard while scrubbing a pot, meant something she could not afford for it to mean. "Get up," she whispered to the wolf. "Please, get up. You're going to get me killed." The wolf did not get up. It pressed its head harder against her hip. It made the low humming sound she had learned over 9 nights to associate with contentment. And the sound carried in the stone corridor and reached every ear behind the king. And the high priestess, who had recovered her voice, said, in a tone that was not quite triumphant and not quite afraid, "The diamond wolf has chosen." Sarah looked at the king. The king looked at Sarah. He had not yet said anything. His jaw was doing something complicated. There was a calculation happening behind his eyes that she could see the shape of without being able to read the contents. And she understood, with the practical clarity of a woman who had been a servant for 2 years and a noble's daughter for 20 before that whatever he said in the next 10 seconds was going to decide a great deal of her remaining life. She did not look away from him. She did not have the energy to look away. She had carried bone scraps to a wounded animal for 9 nights running, and she had not eaten dinner because she had given the broth away, and she was tired, and she had nothing left in her with which to be afraid in the proper noble fashion. So she just stood there, with her hand on the silver wolf's head, and looked at the Alpha King of the wolf line, and waited. He saw her looking. He saw the soot on her cheek. He saw the torn sleeve. He saw the strip of that same sleeve tied around the wolf's flank. He understood without anyone telling him what had happened in his own kitchen garden over the last 9 nights, and he understood, more slowly, that the goddess had not made an error. The goddess had not made an error in 2 years. He had. "Bring her up," he said to Callan. His voice was the low, controlled thing he used in war councils. It did not invite questions. "Bring the wolf. Clear the hall. Send the candidates to their chambers. The selection continues." Princess Raylan of Osreach did not go to her chamber. She went to the small antechamber off the great hall where the candidates' attendants had been waiting, and she dismissed them all with a single tilt of her chin. And then she stood in the empty room for a long time with her hand flat against the cold stone of the wall, and she breathed. She had been raised, since she was old enough to understand the word treaty, to be the bridge between 2 packs that had bled each other for a generation. She had been taught the dances and the etiquettes and the 7 forms of polite refusal. She had been taught how to disagree with a king without offending him. She had not been taught what to do when the goddess herself walked into a hall and said, with the voice of a struck bell, "No, not her." She had expected, if anything went wrong tonight, that it would go wrong in some human way she could fix. a nervous candidate fainting, a noble making a scene, a procedural irregularity she could smooth with a smile. She had not expected to be unmade by a wolf. Her father's voice was already in her head, the way it always was. He would say, "This is a problem you will solve." He would say, "A treaty is parchment. A treaty can be rewritten. You remain. You remain useful. You will find a way to remain." She breathed once more, slowly. And then she did something she had not expected to do, which was that she let herself feel, for one full count of 10, the relief. It came up under the panic like a second tide. She had not wanted him. She had agreed to want him because the alternative was a war that would kill more of her cousins. But she had not wanted him. And the wolf had walked off the dais and roared at her, and at every other woman standing on it. And the part of her that had not been allowed to have an opinion on her own marriage had just been handed an opinion by a creature older than her bloodline. She closed her eyes. She let it land. Then she opened her eyes, and she became again the daughter her father had built. She would salvage this. She would salvage the peace, at least. The wedding could be argued. The war could not be allowed to come back. She walked out of the antechamber with her chin level, and she went looking for the Alpha King. Meanwhile, in the council chamber 2 corridors above the great hall, Sarah was sitting on the edge of a chair that was too fine for her, with her hands flat on her knees so they would not shake, and the diamond wolf was lying across her feet like a very large and very heavy dog. The king was at the window. He had not turned around in some time. The high priestess sat at the long table with a tablet of beeswax in front of her and was, with great care, writing nothing. The captain of the guard stood at the door. No one had spoken in nearly a minute. Sarah's left foot was going numb under the wolf. She did not move it. She did not, in fact, intend to move ever again, on the theory that any movement she made in this room was likely to be the wrong one. "You tended it," the king said at last. He did not turn from the window. "Yes." "How long?" 9 nights. "Where?" "The kitchen garden, behind the rosemary." "Did you know what it was?" She thought about the question. She thought about the way the wolf had hummed under her palm. She thought about how, on the 4th night, she had told it about Kale. Told it the whole thing. Just talked into its fur because there was no one else she could say any of it to. And how the wolf had pressed its head into her stomach and not made a sound. "No," she said. "I thought it was a wolf." "It is a wolf." "I thought it was a dying one." He turned then. His face in the firelight was not the face she had seen in the corridor. The corridor face had been the king's face, the working face, the face that made decisions with the back of its teeth. This face was something underneath that. He looked at her for a long moment without speaking, and she could not have said what she saw in it, only that it was not anger, and it was not pity, and it was something her chest did not know how to file. "What is your name?" he said. "Sarah. Sarah Pell." "Pell." He repeated it the way a man repeats a word he is going to remember. "From the border villages?" "Yes." "And before the kitchens?" She did not answer. He did not need her to. He had already understood. He came across the room, slowly, and he did not sit, but he put one hand flat on the back of the chair across from her, and the wolf opened its eyes and watched him without lifting its head. And he said, in a voice that was quieter than any voice she had heard him use, "You bound it with your sleeve. It was bleeding. You fed it from your own ration. It needed broth. You did not tell anyone. I would have been punished for stealing. He closed his eyes for half a second. When he opened them, something in his face had moved, and she felt the hum in her chest, the warm thing she had thought was relief, the thing she had felt under her wrist on the 9th night when the wolf had leaned into her hand. She felt it now without the wolf touching her at all. She did not understand it. The wolf at her feet made the low, contented hum, and she realized, with a slow, cold clarity that was not unpleasant, that the hum was not coming from the wolf. The hum was coming from the king. The council that convened at midnight was the smallest the keep had hosted in a decade. The king, the captain of the guard, the high priestess, the chancellor, an old man named Halstead with hands that had signed every consequential parchment of the last 40 years. And, by her own request, Princess Raylan of Vossreach, who had not been invited and had walked in anyway and had been allowed to stay because the king had taken one look at her face and understood that sending her away would be the start of a different war. Sarah was not in the room. Sarah was in the small adjoining chamber with a cup of broth she had not touched and the diamond wolf asleep across her feet. And she could hear the voices through the door, but not the words. And she had decided that this was a mercy. Inside, the chancellor spoke first. He was a careful man, and he did not waste motion. He said, "The treaty is the larger question. The selection is the louder one. We solve them in that order." "We solve them together," said the high priestess. "The wolf has rendered a verdict. There is no appeal." "There is always an appeal," said Halstead mildly. "There is appeal to common sense, to political necessity, to the well-being of the realm. The wolf is a sacred sign. Sacred signs have been interpreted before." "It knelt," said the priestess. "It knelt in front of 200 witnesses, including the daughter of Vossreach. It is not interpretable." Raylan lifted her hand. The room went quiet, because it was not the room's habit to ignore a Vossreach hand. "My father," she said, "will not go to war over a wolf." Halstead looked at her. "Princess, he will go to war over an insult. He will not go to war over a wolf. There is a difference, and the difference is the entire shape of what you are about to do. If you set me aside with respect, with a public reason that does not touch my honor, and with a treaty rewritten to preserve the trade and the border accords without the marriage clause, he will accept it. He will not be pleased. He will be, on balance, relieved. I am his only daughter. He did not enjoy giving me away." She spoke evenly. She spoke the way she had been taught to speak, which is to say, without any of the feelings she was actually carrying. And the king, watching her from across the table, understood for the first time in the 5 years he had known of her existence that she was not the obstacle he had been treating her as. "You are offering us a way out," he said. "I am offering us both a way out," said Raylan. "I would prefer not to be married to a man whose ancestral guardian roared at me in front of my own attendants. You would prefer not to insult the goddess. We can be useful to each other." Halstead made a sound that was almost a laugh. "And what do you want in return, princess?" "A formal letter to my father, in the king's own hand, naming a reason for the dissolution that does not touch my fitness or my honor. A renegotiation of the trade accords with terms not less favorable than the current draft. And," she paused, just slightly, "an introduction." "An introduction," said the king. "To the maid," said Raylan. "I want to meet the woman the goddess preferred to me. I would like to know what the goddess sees. It would be useful to me going forward." There was a silence. The priestess looked at the king. The king looked at the door behind which Sarah was sitting with a wolf on her feet and a cup of cooling broth in her hands. "Granted," he said. "All 3. Then we have an agreement, said Raylan. And she did not smile, but something around her eyes loosened by a fraction, and she sat back, and that was that. Halstead, who had spent 40 years in rooms like this and was not easily impressed, exhaled slowly through his nose and made a small notation on his parchment. There remains, he said, the matter of the candidate the Diamond Wolf chose. There is no matter, said the priestess. There is the question of what is done with her, said Halstead patiently. And that is a matter, Your Reverence, whether or not you wish to call it one. She is an Omega from the border villages. She is a previously rejected mate. She is a kitchen servant. The court will not take this gracefully, regardless of what the wolf has said. There will be factions. There will be a noblewoman or two who will not simply go home because we sent the candidates to bed. And there will be, he looked at the king briefly, elements within your own council who have been waiting for an instability they could use. We must move carefully. She is not a problem to be solved, said the king. I did not say she was, Your Majesty. I said she was a target. The room cooled. Explain, said the king. The Diamond Wolf is silver, said Halstead. Its hide, by the old texts, carries properties. There are factions within the realm and outside it that have, for generations, kept private libraries on these properties. The wolf has not manifested in 41 years. 41 years is a long time for those libraries to have been read. I would expect, Your Majesty, that within 3 days, possibly 2, someone will attempt to take the wolf. The king did not answer immediately. The wolf, on the other side of the door, made a low, contented hum. Sarah, on the other side of the door, set her cup down with great care because her hands were shaking, and she did not want anyone to hear it. Then we keep it close, said the king, and the girl with it. She is the only one it has knelt to. It will not leave her. It will not leave her, agreed the priestess. Then she stays in the royal wing, said the king, under guard. Callan, you will pick the men yourself. Halstead, you will draft the dissolution letter to Vossreach tonight. Reverence, you will prepare the formal claiming ceremony for... He hesitated, the smallest pause. The new candidate. Princess Raylan, I owe you a courtesy I cannot yet name. You will have it. Raylan inclined her head. Halstead set down his pen. The priestess rose. The captain opened the door. And Sarah, who had heard none of the words and all of the tones, looked up from her broth and saw the king come through the door alone. And she stood up too quickly, and the wolf rose with her, and she said before he could speak, I don't want it. He stopped. You don't want what? Whatever this is. Whatever it just made me. I'm not... She gestured helplessly at her own torn sleeve, at the wolf, at the room, at the entire architecture of a keep she had only ever cleaned. I'm not the right shape for this. I just fed it. I just bound its leg. That's all I did. I don't want a thing. I don't want a position. I want to go back to the kitchens. He looked at her for a long time. I know, he said finally. What? I know you don't want it. I can see that you don't want it. That is, I suspect, a significant part of why the wolf chose you. She did not have an answer for that. He stepped closer, slowly, the way a person steps toward a creature that might startle. Sarah Pell, he said, and her name in his mouth was a careful thing, deliberate, almost formal. I am not going to send you back to the kitchens. I am also not going to make you stand in a white dress tomorrow morning and recite vows you did not ask for. We have time. The wolf has bought us time. Will you let me give you a room with a door that locks, and a meal you did not have to steal, and a night of sleep? And we will speak again in the morning." She looked at the wolf. The wolf looked at her. "All right," she said. The room they gave her had a window that faced east, and the sheets smelled of cedar, and there was a fire that someone had laid and lit before she arrived, and Sarah Pell stood in the middle of the carpet for nearly a full minute before she could make her body sit down on the bed. The wolf went around the room first, the way a dog inspects a new place, sniffing the corners, the hearth, the foot of the bed, and then it lay down across the threshold of the door with its great silver back to the room, and she understood that she was being guarded. She slept badly. She slept the way a person sleeps the first night out of a long imprisonment, which is to say, in pieces, waking every hour to confirm that the room was real and that she was still in it. At some point near dawn, she got up and put her hand on the wolf's head and whispered, "What have you done to me?" And the wolf opened one pale eye and hummed, and she felt the answering hum somewhere 4 corridors away, low and steady, and she understood, without permitting the understanding to become a thought, that the king was awake too, and that he was, in some way she did not have a vocabulary for, sleeping no better than she was. In the morning, a woman she did not know came to dress her. The woman's name was Mira, and she was older, with steady hands and the brisk manner of someone who had dressed nervous brides before, and she did not ask Sarah questions, which was the kindest thing anyone had done for Sarah in 2 years. Mira put her in a dress of soft gray wool, not white, not silk, nothing that announced anything, and braided her hair in the simple style of the border villages, and said, "The king said you are not to be made to wear anything you did not choose. He said you are to come down to breakfast as yourself. He said if you do not wish to come down at all, a tray will be brought." Sarah looked at her in the mirror. She did not recognize the woman in the mirror, because the woman in the mirror had her hair clean, and a dress that fit, and no soot on her cheek. "I'll come down," she said. She came down. The breakfast room was small. The king was already there, in plain clothes for once, no circlet, no ceremonial black, just a dark shirt with the sleeves pushed up, and he stood when she entered, which startled her so badly she nearly stepped back into Mira. He gestured at the chair across from him. The wolf went to the hearth and lay down and closed its eyes, and Sarah understood that this room had been chosen specifically because the wolf would be comfortable in it. "Sit," he said. "Please, eat." She sat. She ate. She had not eaten a real breakfast in 2 years, and she had not eaten one in front of a king ever, and her body did not know how to do both at once, so she ate slowly, in small bites. And he did not fill the silence, and she found, after a while, that the silence was not pressing on her the way silences usually did. He spoke first when she had finished. "I would like," he said, "to ask you some questions. Not as a king, as—" He paused, considering, and then chose the word with visible care. "A man who has been told by his ancestral guardian that he has been wrong about something for 2 years. She set down her spoon. "All right. Tell me about Kale." She had not expected the name. Her face went hot. "Why?" "Because he is the reason you were in the kitchen garden," he said simply. "And the kitchen garden is the reason the wolf is alive. I would like to understand the path." She told him. She told him in the short, flat sentences she had practiced for 2 years on the rare occasions when anyone had asked. And then, when he kept listening without interrupting, she told him in longer sentences. And then she told him things she had not said aloud before, including the thing about how, in the chapel, She had not been heartbroken, exactly, because she had not loved Cale. But she had been ashamed in a way she had not known a body could be ashamed. The kind of shame that lives in the bones and changes the way a person walks. He listened. He did not interrupt. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. And then he said, "He is no longer in my service." "What?" "Cale. He left the warriors 3 winters ago to take a private commission with the Hymir house. He is not in this keep. He is not within my reach today. He will be within my reach by the end of the week, if you would like him to be." She stared at him. "I don't," she said. "I don't want him hurt. I don't want anything to do with him." "I am not offering to hurt him. I am offering you a writ with my seal that publicly nullifies the rejection. The chapel record will be amended. The shame is not yours. It was never yours. I would like that on parchment, and I would like the parchment read in the same chapel where the rejection was spoken. You do not have to accept. I am only telling you that the offer exists." She did not cry. She was very close. She looked down at her plate and breathed, once, and then she said, "Thank you. You do not need to thank me for correcting a record. I am thanking you for offering." He nodded. He did not press. He let the silence come back, and the silence was not unkind. After a while, when she had recovered, he said, "There is a second matter, a practical one. Halstead believes someone will try to take the wolf within 2 or 3 days. The hide has properties that certain people have spent generations collecting books about. I have placed guards. I have placed them carefully. But I want you to know what the threat is, because it is your wolf, and you should not be lied to about your own life. It's not my wolf. It chose you. That makes it your wolf in every sense the law recognizes, and most senses it does not." She looked at the silver creature by the hearth. It was sleeping, or pretending to. The bandage from her sleeve was still on its flank, and someone, probably Mira, had not removed it, because no one had been willing to. "Who would try to take it?" she said. "I have suspicions. I do not yet have proof." "Tell me the suspicions." He hesitated. "I would rather not poison your judgment of people you have not yet met. I have spent 2 years cleaning the floors of people I have not met. I am not unfamiliar with the court. Tell me." He told her. He named 3. The first was the obvious one, a noble named Roderick of the Hymir house, the same house Cale had taken his commission with. A man whose appetites were known and whose debts were larger than his estates. The second was a faction within the river packs that had been agitating for what they called purification of bloodlines. The third he named slowly, and she could see that he did not want to name it, and he named it anyway. "Halstead," he said, "your chancellor." "He is not my chancellor. He served my father. He has been at this table for 40 years. I trust him, Sarah. I have trusted him since I was a boy. But Callan does not, and Callan is rarely wrong about people, and Halstead spoke last night in a way that—" He stopped. "I am perhaps being unfair to an old man. Or you are being correct about an old man." He looked at her. Something around his eyes did the loosening thing she had seen on Raylan's face the night before. "You are quicker than I expected." "I have been quiet for 2 years," she said. "I have not been asleep." The next 2 days moved like a held breath. Sarah did not return to the kitchens. She did not exactly do anything else either, because no one knew what to give a woman who had been chosen by the Diamond Wolf and had not asked to be. And so she walked the upper gardens with the wolf at her side, and she ate 3 meals a day that she had not stolen, and she sat in the small library off the breakfast room and read whatever Mira put in front of her. And twice a day the king came and sat with her for an hour and they talked. Sometimes about the realm, and sometimes about nothing. And the hum in her chest grew steadier and warmer, and she stopped pretending she did not feel it. Princess Raylan came to see her on the second afternoon. She came alone, without attendants, which was unusual for her, and she stood in the doorway of the library for a moment, looking at Sarah the way a scholar looks at an unfamiliar text. And then she came in and sat across from her and said, without preamble, "You are not what I expected." "I am sorry," said Sarah automatically. "Don't be. I had expected a schemer, a clever girl who had positioned herself near the wolf on purpose. I had prepared a number of questions for that girl. I will not need them." "I'm not clever," said Sarah. Raylan smiled faintly. "You are. You simply are not the kind of clever I was prepared for. May I ask you something?" "Yes?" "When you bound the wolf's leg, did you think anyone would ever know?" "No." "Did you do it because you thought it was watching?" "No. I did it because it was bleeding." Raylan looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded once and stood up. "I came to tell you," she said, "that I will be at the ceremony tomorrow. I will stand in the front row. I will applaud. My father has been informed and has, in his own difficult way, accepted. The treaty will be rewritten. There will not be a war. I wanted you to know that because I suspect no one has told you, and I suspect you have been carrying it." Sarah's eyes filled. She did not let them spill. "Thank you. You owe me nothing. I owe you a great deal. Then promise me one thing. Anything." "Be kind to him," said Raylan softly. "I do not love him. I never would have. But he has been at war for 5 years, and he has carried it badly, and you are the first person in a long time he has looked at like a person. Be kind to him. That is all." She left. Sarah sat in the library for a long time afterward, with her hand on the wolf's head, and she understood that she had just been given a gift she would spend years trying to deserve. The third day was the day of the new ceremony. It was not to be a wedding, not yet. The king had been firm on that, and so had she. But a formal recognition of the wolf's choice, and a public acknowledgement that the rejection of Sarah Pell 2 years ago had been spoken in error. It was to be small, court only. The same great hall. Mira dressed her in pale blue, not white, not red, nothing that committed her to anything beyond the truth that the wolf had knelt at her feet. The wolf walked beside her down the corridor. The priestess waited at the dais. The king was already there, in the dark ceremonial coat with the circlet, and his face when he saw her did the thing that faces do when their owner has been bracing for a wound that has not come. She walked the aisle slowly, because the wolf was at her hip and she did not want to outpace it. The court watched. Some of the watching was kind, some of it was not. She had grown up around court and she could feel both kinds without looking. Halfway down the aisle, the wolf made a sound. It was not the contented hum. It was a low, deliberate growl, and it came from somewhere in its chest that Sarah had not heard before. And her hand, resting on its shoulder, felt the muscles bunch under the silver fur. She looked up. The growl was directed at the front row, specifically at Halstead, who stood beside the king's empty chair with his hands folded in front of him in the chancellor's pose, and who did not, when the wolf growled, look surprised. He looked, Sarah realized, with a slow, cold drop in her stomach, prepared. The doors at the back of the hall slammed open. 6 men in mercenary leather came through them at a run, with crossbows already raised, and the bolts they carried were tipped with something dull and gray that did not catch the candlelight the way iron should have. And Sarah understood, without being told, that whatever the dull gray metal was, it was the substance Halstead had spoken about in his careful old voice 2 nights ago. The one that suppressed shifter healing and severed bonds. And the bolts were not aimed at the king. They were aimed at the wolf. Several things happened in the same second. Callan shouted, the king moved, the court screamed, and Halstead, beside the empty throne, took 2 quick steps backward toward the side door, which was the gesture of a man who had known the timing in advance. The first bolt left the first crossbow. Sarah did not think. She stepped in front of the wolf. The bolt took her in the shoulder, just above the collarbone, and the impact spun her half around, and she went down on one knee with her hand still on the wolf's neck. And she heard, very far away, the king's voice making a sound she had not heard a person make before. The second bolt did not fire. Callan's sword took the second crossbowman through the throat before he could pull. The third bolt went wide because the third man was by then also dead. The 4th, 5th, and 6th mercenaries broke and ran for the side door, and the side door was already closed because Raylan of Vossreach had crossed the dais in 3 strides and slammed the bolt across it with her own hands. And the mercenaries hit the door and turned, weapons up, and met the king. The king was not, in that moment, entirely a man. His eyes had gone the dark slate gray of a coming storm, and his canines had lengthened and his hands were ending in claws, and he went through the 3 mercenaries the way a winter wind goes through dry grass. And it was over very quickly, and not cleanly. And Sarah, on one knee with a bolt in her shoulder and a hand still on the wolf's neck, watched it happen and felt no fear at all. Because she understood, with the calm clarity of a woman who had finally run out of room to be afraid in, that he was killing them for her, and that she was going to be all right, and that the wolf was going to be all right, and that this was the shape of being protected, and she had forgotten what the shape was. The pain came later. It came after Callan had carried her up the dais stairs, after the priestess had broken the bolt off short with her own hands so they could move her without driving the head deeper, after the king had turned from the bodies on the marble floor with blood on his knuckles and crossed the hall to her in 3 strides and taken her face in both hands and said her name once, low, like a vow he had been holding in since the corridor. The pain came when they laid her on the long table in the small chamber behind the dais, and the physician came with his bag. And the physician took one look at the bolt head he could see through the fabric of her dress and went very still. And then he said, in the careful, flat voice physicians use when they do not want to alarm anyone, "This is gray metal. We need to get it out, now, before her body warms it." "Will she live?" said the king. "If we move now, yes, the hide will not. If they have more bolts and they reach the wolf will not survive the night. The gray metal does not heal, not in shifters, not in the wolf." "Then we move now." The wolf was already at the head of the table. It had pushed past the guards without effort and laid its great silver head on the wood beside Sarah's, and its pale eyes were level with hers, and the hum in her chest, despite the bolt and the blood and the cold gray weight of the metal lodged in her shoulder, was steady. She looked at the king. He had cleaned his hands on a cloth, but there was still a smear of blood at his temple where he had pushed his hair back, and his face was the face from the breakfast room. The underneath face, the one she had been learning. "Halstead," she said. "Gone," said Callan from the door. "Through the side door before the princess could close it. We have men on the gates." "He will not run for the gates," said the king quietly. "He will run for the relic vault in the south wing. He has a key. He has had a key for 40 years. He will go for the second set of bolts. There are more than 6. The physician had cut her sleeve open with shears. He was working at the bolt with the small, careful motions of a man who had done this in a war tent. She was aware of his hands distantly. The center of her attention was the wolf, and the king, and the calculation she could see sliding behind the king's eyes. "How many bolts?" she said. 20, said Callan. "By the inventory, possibly more." "Then he will come back here," said the king. "He cannot leave the wolf alive. The whole point of the operation was the hide. If the wolf survives, his patrons abroad do not pay, and he has spent 40 years preparing for this payment. He will come back. He will come back with whatever men he has left in the keep. And there are men in the keep loyal to him, because 40 years buys loyalty. We have perhaps an hour." "Move the wolf," said Sarah. They looked at her. "Move it. Out of the keep. Out of his reach. Send it with Callan. Send it with Raylin. Send it with anyone. He cannot kill what he cannot find." "The wolf will not leave you," said the priestess. "It must." "It cannot," said the priestess gently. "The bond does not work that way. It chose you. It will not be made to leave you while you are wounded. It would have to be carried. And a wolf that size cannot be carried by men who are not its bonded." "Then I will tell it to go," said Sarah. "The bond does not work that way either. It does not take orders. It takes love," said Sarah. "It takes love. I know. I know what it takes. Bring it here." The physician had the bolt out. He was packing the wound. She did not look at her own shoulder, because she had decided some hours ago that she did not have time to be a person with a wounded shoulder. She turned her head on the table, and the wolf turned its head toward her, and she put her uninjured hand against the side of its silver face, and she said, with her mouth very close to its ear, "Listen, listen to me. I need you to do something for me, and you are not going to like it. And I am going to be all right whether you do it or not. But I need you to do it anyway, because if you do not do it, you are going to die. And if you die, I will have spent 9 nights in a cold garden for nothing, and that is the only thing I have left from those 9 nights. Do you understand me? I need you to go. I need you to go with the captain. I need you to leave this keep. I need you to let them put you somewhere I do not know about, because if I do not know where you are, then no one can make me tell. And I do not trust myself under gray metal. And I would rather not know. I will not see you for some time. I do not know how long. You will come back when it is safe. Or you will not come back at all. And if you do not come back, I will live anyway. Because I lived before I knew you. And I will live after. Do you understand me? Look at me. Do you understand me?" The wolf looked at her. The pale flint eyes did not blink. The hum in her chest pulled tight, painfully tight, the way a thread pulls before it snaps, and then it loosened, and the wolf pressed its forehead against hers very lightly and made a sound she had not heard it make before. A small, low sound that she understood without being told was grief. "I know," she said. "I know. Go." It went. It rose from the head of the table, and it did not look back. Callan opened the side door. The wolf went through it, and Callan and 4 of his most trusted men went after it, and the door closed. The priestess made a soft sound and turned her face away. The king did not turn his face away. He was watching Sarah. "You just gave it up," he said quietly. "I just kept it alive. You understand what you have done. I understand that I am still a maid from the border villages who fed a dying animal. The wolf chose me for that. If I am not still that, the wolf chose wrong. And I will not let the wolf be wrong. I will not let the wolf die so that I can be a Luna." "Sarah, I know what you are about to say. Don't. Halstead is coming. Get the men ready." He did not say it. He took her uninjured hand instead, and he held it, and the hum in her chest, which had loosened when the wolf went through the door, did not vanish. It simply became him. It had been him for some time. It became him fully now. She held his hand, and she felt the steady, warm weight of it, and she understood, without being told, that the bond had not been with the wolf. The bond had been with the man the wolf had been carrying her toward. Halstead came back. He came back with 11 men, 6 of them keep guards he had bought across the years, and 5 of them mercenaries he had been keeping in a barn outside the south wall. And he came in through the south wing because the south wing was where the relic vault was, and the relic vault was where the rest of the gray metal bolts had been. And he did not, when he came, expect to find the Alpha King standing in the corridor outside the vault, waiting for him. He stopped. The king looked at him for a long moment, and Halstead, who had spent 40 years reading the faces of wolves, read this one and understood, with a calm that surprised him, that he was not going to live through the next 10 minutes. 40 years, said the king. 40 years, agreed Halstead mildly. I read the texts when I was a young man. I was not always old, Your Majesty. I was a scholar once. Did you know? I read about the hide. I read about what it could do. I read about the substances one could distill, the contracts one could write against the lives of kings. I made certain arrangements. They have taken a long time to mature. I am sorry it had to be on your watch. I am fond of you. I have always been fond of you. Where are the bolts? In the vault, behind me. I am not, as it happens, going to let you take them, Your Majesty. I have come too far. Stand aside. The king did not stand aside. The fight was short. Halstead's men were good, but they were not Wolf Keep guards in earnest. And the keep guards at the king's back were. And Callan had returned, having seen the wolf safely to the western forest with 4 of his men remaining as escort. And the captain came up the south corridor at a run, with his sword already wet from a skirmish at the postern. And the 11 were down to 4. And then 2. And then none. And Halstead, who had not drawn a weapon in 40 years, drew one now. An old short blade he had kept in his desk for ceremony. And he raised it at the king with a hand that was, at the last, perfectly steady. He did not strike. He never had the chance. The bolt that took him through the throat came from his own quiver, dropped on the stone floor when his last mercenary fell, and it was kicked across the flagstones by a keep guard's boot, and it skidded and rose on its fletching, and stuck in the meat of Halstead's neck on the upswing. And Halstead, who had spent 40 years signing parchments with great care, sat down very slowly against the vault door with one of his own gray metal bolts in his throat. And he did not say anything else, because the gray metal was suppressing whatever final speech a shifter scholar would have been able to make. And his eyes, at the last, were not afraid. They were only, very faintly, surprised. In the way of a man who had done his arithmetic for 40 years, and had only at the end noticed an error in the second column. The king stood over him until he was sure. Then he turned. and he went back to the small chamber behind the dais, and Sarah was sitting up against a bank of cushions with her shoulder bound and the color slowly coming back into her face. And the hum in her chest leapt when he came through the door. And he crossed to her in 3 strides and went down on one knee beside the cot and put his forehead against her uninjured shoulder. And he did not weep, but he was not far from it. And she put her good hand in his hair and held him there. And they did not speak for a long while. The wolf came back at moonrise. It came back across the western lawn with Callan's 4 men trailing behind it at a respectful distance. And it walked into the keep through the front gate as if it had been gone an afternoon and not a lifetime. And it came up the stairs and through the corridor and into the small chamber and laid its great silver head on Sarah's lap and made the contented hum. And Sarah, who had spent the entire intervening hours not crying, finally cried then, into its fur. The deep, racking kind of crying she had not done in 2 years. And the wolf bore it patiently, and the king held her hand, and the priestess in the doorway made the small sign of completion that the order made when a verdict had been honored to its end. The realm, in the days that followed, did not entirely understand what had happened in its own great hall. The court learned the parts they were permitted to learn. The treaty with Vossreach was rewritten and signed. The marriage clause was struck. Princess Raylan went home with a letter in her father's hand and a trade accord she had personally negotiated. And her father, when he read the letter, did the difficult thing of laughing once, briefly, and saying that the goddess had a sense of timing he did not envy his old friend Wolf for receiving. Cale of Hymir was found, in due course, in a private commission 3 duchies away, and was returned to the chapel where he had spoken his rejection 2 years before. And the rejection was, in front of witnesses, formally nullified by the Alpha King seal, and Cale was permitted to walk away with his reputation intact only because Sarah, when asked, said that she did not want him hurt, that she did not want him punished, that she wanted only the parchment corrected, because the parchment was the thing that had followed her into the kitchens, and the parchment was the thing that needed to be put right. Cale walked out of the chapel a quieter man than he had walked in, and what became of him afterward is a story that does not belong in this one. The Hymir house was diminished. Roderick's debts were called in. The Riverpack faction that had agitated for purification of bloodlines lost 3 of its loudest voices in the South Wing skirmish, and the rest, sensing the wind, became suddenly quiet. The Chancellor's seat sat empty for some weeks, and then was given to a younger woman named Anya of the Crescent Hold, who had stood on the dais in white silk and been roared at by the Diamond Wolf, and had taken it, in the end, as instructive rather than insulting, and who proved, over the following years, to be the best chancellor the Wolf line had appointed in a century. The wolf stayed. The wolf did not leave the keep again. It slept across the threshold of Sarah's room every night, and it walked the gardens at her hip every morning, and the gardeners learned, with some adjustment, to treat the rosemary hedge as a sacred site. In the kitchen, the cook, who had once docked Sarah's wages for taking an extra ladle of broth, became, over a span of months, a woman who personally selected the marrow bones for the wolf's daily meal. And she did this with the dignity of a person who has decided, retroactively, to have been generous all along. The formal claiming did not happen for almost a year. The king had been firm on this point, and so had Sarah, and no one in the realm had the standing to argue. They wanted, both of them, to be sure, not of the bond, which neither of them doubted, but of the shape of what the bond was being asked to become. Sarah spent that year learning to be a person again. She read, slowly at first, and then voraciously. She walked the keep, and then the city, and then the border villages where she had grown up. And she did not, when she walked the border villages, pretend not to be from there. She brought a healer with her, twice, and a teacher, 3 times. And the 3rd time she brought the king, plainly dressed, no circlet, walking at her hip with the wolf at his other side. And the village children had, by then, heard enough rumor to recognize the wolf. And they followed the 3 of them through the lanes the way children follow a parade, asking questions. And Sarah answered every question she could and laughed at the ones she could not. And the king, at her hip, watched her laugh with a small, hidden smile that the children did not see, and that she felt in her chest like a hand laid flat. She found, in those months, that she was good at the work, not the ceremonial work. She did not love the ceremonial work and never grew to, but the practical work of being a Luna in the older sense. The sense that meant a woman who walked the realm and listened to it and brought back what she had heard. She made decisions about grain stores. She made decisions about the placement of healers in the border villages. She made a decision, in the autumn, that the Omegas of the keep would no longer be quartered separately from the Alphas in the servant wing, because the separation had been a custom rather than a law, and she did not see the use of it. And the king, when she told him, simply said, "All right," and signed the order, and that was the end of it. She made friends. She made a friend in particular of Mira, who turned out, beneath the brisk hands and the careful mouth, to be a woman with a tart sense of humor and a private fondness for cheap romance ballads. And Sarah and Mira formed, over a span of months, the kind of friendship that involved sitting on a window seat in the late evening with a pot of tea and laughing at nothing. And Sarah understood that she had not had a friend, a real one, in a very long time, and that she had not realized she missed it. She made a friend, too, of Princess Raylin, who wrote letters from Vossreach with surprising regularity, and whose letters were dry and observant and contained, more often than not, a gossip item about a Vossreach noble too pompous to have noticed his own pomp. Sarah kept the letters in a drawer by her bed. She wrote back, in handwriting that improved noticeably across the year. The king courted her properly, in the older sense of the word. He brought her things. He brought her a carved figure of a wolf, no larger than her thumb, that he had whittled himself across an evening in the Southern campaign 3 years before, and had kept, without knowing why, in his coat pocket ever since. He brought her a pressed sprig of rosemary from the kitchen garden, the same hedge under which she had bound the wolf's flank. He brought her a small silver charm in the shape of a cup, which she did not understand at first, and which he, when she asked, explained meant only that he had been thinking of the cup of broth she had not eaten on the first night. She wore the charm on a chain inside her dress. It rested between her collarbones, warm against her skin, and she touched it sometimes without thinking, the way a person touches a place they have decided is safe. The first time they were intimate, on a night in late spring when the windows were open and the cedar smell of the room was joined by the smell of new leaves, she stopped him twice. And he stopped each time without complaint, the second time with a small, low laugh against her collarbone, and she understood that being stopped was not, for him, a loss. That being stopped was, in fact, a kind of pleasure, because being stopped meant she trusted him to stop, and he was being trusted with something. When they finally did not stop, it was slow, and it was sensory in the way that things are sensory when one has been touch-starved for a long time. And she did not, afterward, feel any of the things she had been told a woman was supposed to feel. She felt, instead, like a person who had finally come inside out of a long cold. He kissed the bolt scar on her shoulder. He kissed it the way one kisses a place one is grateful for. The claiming, when it came at last, was small. It happened in the kitchen garden, beside the rosemary hedge, with no court present, and only the priestess and Callan and Mira and Raylin, who had ridden 3 days for it, and the wolf at Sarah's hip, and the bite at her shoulder was careful and quick, and she did not flinch. And afterward she rested her forehead against his, and they breathed together for a long time, and the bond, which had been there for nearly a year, simply tightened by a final inch, like a knot drawn snug. The epilogue, 3 years on, opens in the same kitchen garden in the early morning. The frost has not come yet. The rosemary is silvering with dew. The wolf is older now. By a year that on it looks like nothing at all, and it is lying full length under the hedge with its great pale flank rising and falling, and there is a small child sitting beside it, a boy of perhaps 2.5, with the dark slate wolf eyes and his mother's quiet mouth, and he is patting the wolf's flank with the absorbed seriousness of a child performing important work. His name is Tem. He was named for no one in particular, because Sarah and the king had agreed that they did not want the weight of an ancestral name on him, that he would be permitted to be himself first and a wolf second. Sarah is on the bench by the hedge in a plain gray dress with her hair braided in the border village style. She has a basket beside her with rosemary cuttings in it. Her shoulder, where the bolt went in, twinges in cold weather, but it is warm this morning and the twinge is faint. The king comes down the garden path with 2 cups of something hot in his hands. He is not in ceremonial coat. He is in a shirt with the sleeves pushed up. He sits beside her without speaking and hands her one of the cups. And she leans against him without speaking. And the wolf lifts its head briefly to acknowledge them and then puts it down again because Tem is patting it. "He's going to fall asleep on it," said Sarah. "The wolf or the boy?" "Yes." He laughs, low against her hair. They watch their son for a while. Tem is humming to the wolf. He does not have words yet for most things, but he has a hum, a small, steady, contented hum, and the wolf, beneath his hand, hums back, and the 2 hums fit together in the morning air, the way 2 threads fit when a weaver has finally got the tension right. "Mira said the new healer has arrived from the river packs," said the king after a while. "I'll see her this afternoon. Raylan writes that her father is finally retiring." "Good. He's been threatening to for 2 years. "She wants to come for midwinter." "Tell her yes." "I told her yes already." "Then why are you telling me?" "Because it is pleasant," he said, "to tell you things." She turned her face into his shoulder and laughed. The wolf, under Tem's hand, made the contented hum. Tem, against the wolf's flank, fell asleep with his small palm flat in the silver fur, and Sarah reached down and unhooked the small silver cup-shaped charm from her chain and set it gently in the basket of rosemary cuttings, because she had not, she realized, taken it off in 3 years, and the morning was warm enough to give it a rest, and there was nothing in the garden anymore that she needed it to remind her of. The wolf sneezed, a great, soft, silver sneeze, and Tem, without waking, smiled like a boy who had heard a private joke. Some endings are quiet like that. Until next time.